I'm Dr. Michelle Chance, and I am an applied social psychologist. But even more importantly than that, I am a social justice warrior. And today I'm here to discuss with you in-group prototypicality and the MAGA movement. So let's get started. Now, we'll first start with, defining this, specifically in-group prototypicality as a social psychological concept. And this concept is essentially core to the social identity theory as it's applied to leadership. And it refers to how much a leader embodies the shared identity and values of their group. Now, research has shown that leaders who are seen as prototypical, thus as truly being, one of us, an in-group member, they're more likely to be trusted by their followers. But why? Wondering why. Why would that be? Well, interestingly enough, it's because those leaders reflect back to their followers their own beliefs and their own values. So let's consider how this applies to the MAGA movement. Now, many supporters see the movement's figurehead, Donald Trump, as the embodiment of their group's identity and values. His rhetoric, his policies, and persona, all this resonate with their sense of who they are, making him a prototypical leader in their eyes. This prototypicality is further reinforced by his alignment with core MAGA values. Things like economic protectionism, a strong stance on immigration, and particularly a vision of America's past. And this alignment really just deepens, right? It ingrains the sense of connection and trust between the leader and their supporters. So it's important to understand that trust in leaders isn't just about their actions. It's also about this perceived alignment with group identity. So when someone is seen as one of us, we're more likely to trust them, even if their actions might seem a little questionable to others. And this sheds light on the enduring trust that many individuals place in that figurehead of the movement. So even when faced with controversies, scandals, or actions that may appear outwardly contradictory or even sometimes hypocritical, their unwavering loyalty often stems from that deep-seated belief in the leader's vision and values, and it allows the followers to overlook certain discrepancies in their behaviors or choices. Now, supporters often engage in what we call selective perception, which is a cognitive process through which they interpret information to reinforce and align with their, group identity. And so think of this selective perception kind of like how toddlers have selective hearing, right? Or even teenagers at that. So this phenomenon serves as a psychological shield to, say the least. It allows these individuals to filter out conflicting data and maintain their sense of belonging. Now, as a result of trust and loyalty within the group, it's being very preserved. And so even when unsettling or questionable actions come to light, they don't waver. And this dynamic not only strengthens the bonds among group members, but also really nurtures a shared narrative that can obscure uncomfortable truths. Now, the ability of the movement's figurehead, is to position himself as a prototypical leader, and that helps to strengthen the group cohesion and loyalty. And of course, this shared identity creates a powerful bond that reinforces trust and makes it harder for supporters to leave the group, even when faced with challenges. And there are real world consequences of this strong in-group identity and trust. Firstly, it leads to a significant resistance to any external criticism. I mean, we're serious about this. Like, I'm not listening, that type of resistance. Supporters that deeply identify with a group and trust this leader, they're much more likely to dismiss any negative information about that leader, right? And they might see those claims as being biased or unfounded or even as an attack on the group itself. And this, of course, further solidifies loyalty within that group. It creates kind of an echo chamber where dissenting voices are just pretty much shut out, ignored. And of course, the leader's image will then remain protected in their eyes. Now, obviously, a prominent and influential aspect of the MAGA movement is white Christian nationalism. And this is an ideology that seeks to intertwine American identity with conservative Christian worldview. This belief system often fosters a sense of exclusivity and superiority among its adherents, and that helps to create a worldview that prioritizes a specific interpretation of Christian values. And we say specific, you know what we mean. So, by advocating for a return to this perceived traditional values, this ideology aligns closely with the movement's rallying cry of "Make America Great Again." And that, of course, evokes a nostalgic vision of America that resonates with so many, appealing to a desire for cultural and moral restoration in the face of rapid social change. But I would be prudent to remind many of those that God has no country, and therefore, when religion should not dictate the laws and policies of a diverse nation of peoples. So let's consider some more research, because we know MAGA proponents love scientific research. So, the intergroup sensitivity effect explains why people are more resistant to criticism of their group when it comes from outsiders. The criticism from the outgroup members often seen as less constructive and more threatening, thus leading to more of a defensive reaction. For instance, let's examine the figure here. This visual is a model of how the intergroup sensitivity effect works within the MAGA movement. And so as you see here, it shows the relationships between several key factors. The first factor is group identification, and this refers to how strongly someone identifies with their respective movement, in this case, the MAGA movement. Negative evaluation, source identity. This is what indicates whether the source of the negative evaluation or criticism is from an in-group member, right, someone that's in the group, the MAGA movement, or an out-group member, who is someone that would not be a MAGA supporter or in opposition. Now, the negative emotion, and this represents the negative feelings experienced when receiving any criticism. And of course, from there, we have positive intergroup behavior, which refers to positive actions, behaviors, all of those things that are directed towards their fellow MAGA supporters. And so the model is suggesting that when someone strongly identifies with the MAGA movement, being that they're high identification, and they receive criticism from an outgroup member, they experience much more negative emotions. And these negative emotions, in turn, can lead to increased positive behavior towards their in-group as a way to essentially psychologically defend and reinforce their group identity. Now, in the figure below here, this graph illustrates the results of a study related to this concept within the movement as well. And it shows how positive intergroup, and intergroup refers to within a group, so within that us group. So this is specifically referring to how the positive intergroup behavior varies depending on group identification, being low or high. And the source of a negative evaluation, of course, it can be in the categories being in-group or out-group. And all in all, the takeaway is that with in-group criticism, when it comes from within the MAGA movement, there's not much difference in positive intergroup behavior between those with low and high identification, essentially because they feel like there's someone that they're able to listen to, and they won't feel so opposed because there's less emotional riling up. However, when the criticism comes from an out-group member, People with high group identification show significantly more positive intragroup behavior compared to those with low identification. So again, those hardcore, die-hard, MAGA proponents are going to get super, super emotionally riled up if you say anything about their beloved leader. But people that are just like, I voted for him, it's a thing, but they're not huge on it, they don't necessarily care. And so this supports, of course, this intergroup sensitivity effect and suggests that criticism from outsiders can actually strengthen in-group cohesion and lead to increased positive interactions within the movement. Now, this defensiveness allows for MAGA proponents to essentially double down on their views, and they will double down. And this leads them to become even more entrenched in their beliefs when faced with opposition. So, rather than wavering, this mindset really fortifies their commitment, reinforcing their perspectives in the midst of any sort of adversity that may come their way. And you might ask, well, what does it even matter? Who cares? And what comes of it? Well, one thing that comes of it is the dehumanization of people, which is a perilous process that enables individuals to perceive others as something less than human. And this distorted view creates a very chilling justification for violence and horrific acts, allowing people to disregard the humanity of their victims. And as it would stand, charismatic leaders who wield dehumanizing rhetoric have the power to influence their followers profoundly, encouraging them to adopt similar harmful behaviors and beliefs. And as a poignant example, supporters of MAGA, the supporters of the MAGA movement often resonate with the dehumanizing language employed by Trump, which fosters a divisive atmosphere where empathy is eroded and cruelty becomes even more palatable. Now, two psychological phenomena really do help to explain how supporters maintain their beliefs. The confirmation bias is our tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe, while the cognitive dissonance effect is the discomfort that we feel when holding conflicting beliefs. And so, to reduce this discomfort, supporters may attempt to rationalize the leader's behavior, further solidifying their loyalty to the group. And so that might look like ignoring what has been said as far as in opposition to their leader, or changing it up and saying that's not what was said, that's not what was meant, it meant something else, you misinterpreted it, that has nothing to do with you, or it even has nothing to do with me. And so I have to ask myself, man, this just feels all too familiar, right? Where have I seen this type of behavior before? If only I could just put my finger on it. Oh, I remember. Well, unfortunately, the patterns that we see in the MAGA movement are not new. History is filled with examples of groups being dehumanized by others and, of course, justifying harmful actions. Let's touch on some. Starting with the Confederacy and the Civil War. Obviously, during the American Civil War, the Confederacy was formed by Southern states that identified strongly with the institution of slavery and a distinct Southern identity. White evangelicalism played a role in justifying slavery through religious and moral arguments, and the insistence on maintaining slavery and the Southern way of life led to a brutal and devastating civil war, resulting in significant loss of life, economic destruction, and long-term social and racial tensions in the United States. Now, during the Jim Crow era, white evangelicalism also supported segregation and the disenfranchisement of black Americans. Religious justifications were used to maintain this racial hierarchy to support a social order, and the enforcement of segregation laws led to widespread discrimination, violence, systemic inequality, and so on. And the civil rights movement emerged in response, highlighting the very deep social divisions and injustices perpetuated by these beliefs. And then there's the Tulsa Race Riots or Tulsa Race Massacre, also known as Black Wall Street Massacre. And this involved white mobs attacking the prosperous black community of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Homes and businesses were destroyed, and many black residents were killed. The massacre demonstrates the devastating impact of racial hatred and the lengths to which in group members will go to maintain their perceived superiority. The Osage murders, also known as the Reign of Terror, involved the systematic killing of Osage tribal members in Oklahoma to gain control of their oil rich land. Many Osage people were poisoned, shot, or even otherwise just murdered. And this event really underscores the lethal consequences of greed and the dehumanization of indigenous people, driven by a desire to exploit their resources. I mean, if that doesn't sound like domestic terrorism, I don't know what is. The Rosewood Massacre was another racially motivated attack on a predominantly black American community in Rosewood, Florida, by, of course, more white mobs. And the town was destroyed, and many black residents were killed or even driven out. And this event highlights how in group prototypicality and racial animosity can lead to extreme violence and the destruction of entire communities. And even during the Great Depression, up to 1.8 million people of Mexican descent, many of whom were American citizens, were forcibly deported to Mexico. Right. Okay. Now, these deportations were driven by economic scapegoating and racial discrimination. And of course, this is just another event that illustrates how economic crises can really exacerbate xenophobia and lead to mass expulsion of minority groups. And of course, we can't forget about this one that's also salient currently. The Nazi regime in Germany promoted a strong sense of Aryan identity and superiority. They used propaganda and state policies to dehumanize Jews and other minority groups. And the regime leveraged religious and cultural narratives to justify their actions. Now, of course, negative outcomes included things like the full-on Holocaust, which resulted in the genocide of 6 million Jewish people and millions of other victims, including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political descendants. Now, the atrocities committed during this period are a stark reminder of the dangers of extreme in-group prototypicality and specifically dehumanization. Probably this little known incident was the upstairs lounge arson attack, which was a fire that was set at a gay bar in New Orleans, resulting in the death of 32 people. The attack was one of the deadliest against the LGBTQIA population in the United States history. And this attack highlights the extreme violence and discrimination faced by this population, fueled by societal prejudice and hatred. And it doesn't stop in America. Of course, it can expand. In Rwanda, ethnic tensions between the Hutu and Tutsi groups were exacerbated by political and social narratives that emphasized in-group identity and dehumanized the out-group. Propaganda and historical grievances fueled the conflict. And in this case, this Rwandan genocide from 1994 really resulted in the mass murder of approximately 800,000 Tutsi. That's 800,000 people. And of course, there was moderate loss in the Hutu individuals, but all of this occurred within the span of about 100 days. We're talking about just a little over 3 months, 800,000 people were brutally murdered. And obviously, this genocide left deep scars on the nation and highlighted the catastrophic consequences of extreme in-group prototypicality. And following the 9/11 attacks, there was a significant increase in hate crimes, discrimination, and violence amongst Middle Eastern and Islamic people in the United States. This included racial profiling, physical assaults, and vandalism. And so the post 9/11 backlash really demonstrated how fear and prejudice leads to this widespread discrimination and violence against perceived outgroup members. And last but not least, because obviously not least, the COVID-19 pandemic, which began in the late 2019, was unfortunately accompanied with a significant rise in anti Asian hate and discrimination. And this phenomenon has been observed globally with particularly notable incidences in countries such as, you guessed it, the United States, as well as Canada and the United Kingdom. And although cliche, some might say that, of course, this poem by Martin Niemöller serves as a very powerful reminder of the dangers of silence and inaction in the face of injustice. It highlights how groups can be targeted by one or groups of others, and if we don't speak out against the persecution of others, we may find ourselves alone when they come for us. So, with that, I say reject, resist. Thank you for tuning in.